Maria, how was your visit to India? Were you able to strike or identify some partners for the US nuclear industry in India?
Yeah, I think we actually had a fabulous trip to India.
Mm-hmm.
We've the last 20 years ago, we took a trade mission to India, and if I could just say, the interaction that we had this time, absolutely fabulous. And I say that because it really looks like there's an opportunity for a long-term strategic relationship between the United States and India.
So the India-US partnership started way back in the 1960s, and there's been a fairly long gap. How do you see this and moving forward, particularly in the backdrop of the SHANTI Act?
Yeah, honestly, back in, again, I think it was 20 years ago when we took a trade mission there and a nuclear pact had been signed, and I think there was a lot of momentum and maybe interest that there could be something. And now look, 20 years has gone by. And it was really driven around the nuclear liability conversation and things that needed to be resolved. The SHANTI Act does that. And so I think what's wonderful is I think this SHANTI Act is really a new foundation upon which there's a door that opens between our two countries. And at the same token, it's not just the US and India that are interested right now in nuclear. Honestly, there's interest around the globe on commercial nuclear. And so that's what makes this particular window at this particular time so important for both India and the US to work together in each of our countries and together, but also to work together around the globe.
So, how do you see this going forward? Back when the 123 agreement was being negotiated, India had offered sites for setting up large reactors, the AP1000s, at in Gujarat and Andhra Pradesh. I think the Gujarat site fell through, but you still have an active site in Kovada. So, do we see big nuclear plants coming up, or will be the focus on SMRs and reactors?
Yes, I think it's all of that, right? I think there's going to be interest in large reactors, and as you've mentioned, there have been some specific areas that have been looked at for those, but very much like in the United States, where we're going to be interested to build large and medium and small. I think there's different applications, and I think India will be very much the same. So I think, yes, there's an appetite for large. I think, yes, there's going to be an appetite for small modular reactors and even potentially micro reactors. It just sort of depends on what it exactly is that you want to do, and there's a nuclear solution that's ready for you.
Yeah. Small reactors are usually used to power submarines and warships. What takes it so long to, set the same reactors on land?
So you mentioned small modular reactors being on warships, and I would just say the fuel supply that you can get through your Department of Defense is a little bit different than the fuel supply that you're going to be able to get from a commercial perspective. So it makes the design a little bit different, right? The energy that you're putting in the core, so to speak, is going to be a little bit different. And so, those are things that are being worked on. And then even the small reactors, we call them micro reactors, they're going to be interested in potentially a different fuel supply, like a high assay, low enriched uranium, so a little higher enriched than what we do in the normal commercial sector. And so, again, I would just offer that there's advancements in the fuel supply as well as advancements in the different makes and models. Some are going to be cooled by water, some could be cooled by molten salt, some could be cooled by a gas. And so really you look at what it is that you're trying to do. We think about it as feeding the electric grid, but there's so much more. You might want the high temperature steam. That might be the service that you want to get for whatever industrial use that you have. You might want to produce hydrogen. Maybe hydrogen is interesting to you for whatever your process is. So you can look at nuclear as I could get electricity, I could get high temperature steam, I could use it again to create hydrogen, and it gives you the availability for so many different things that you might be interested in.
Yeah. So does the SHANTI Act address the concerns of the industry adequately, or are there any key areas that you would like the government to have a look at?
I think from the nuclear liability perspective, which was really one of the sticking points, I think the SHANTI Act, as we understand it, addresses that. With any legislation, the implementation of that matters.
Yeah.
So I think what's important right now is for the nuclear sector, both commercially and with our governments, continue to work together as the SHANTI Act is implemented to ensure that we get the value that we think that we see in the SHANTI Act, that it actually can come true, and that we just learn to work together to make sure we're not creating other challenges and issues. So as an example, one of the things that you need to do is share information back and forth. And each of our countries have processes for sharing nuclear information, and they're cumbersome. That's an area that we need to work together on. We need to make it more efficient on our side. We're doing that now. And likewise, India needs to make it more efficient on their side so that we can make this partnership and have it flourish.
Yeah. A key aspect is cost when it comes to setting up nuclear plants, and the thrust has always been on localization. So is the US industry also ready to source locally the components or fabrication of components that is required?
Absolutely. I think part of the solution where the United States builds in other countries, we always have a localization portion of that. We really do want to work with the local community, whether that's for manufacturing pieces and parts, for operating the asset long term. So I think we have a natural rhythm, if you will, of localization. We'll have to get into the details, as we go through these very projects. But honestly, that's the value of the US-India relationship, is your manufacturing, is your strong engineering talent. It is things that you are doing now. You have wonderful nuclear expertise. And that way, we have a lot of innovation that's happening here in the US. We can bring that together, again, not only to build in India, not only just to build in the United States, but for India and the US to work together to build elsewhere around the world.
So India has set a target of 100 gigawatt by 2047. So how big do you think is the market size globally as well as the Indian markets?
Well, my goodness. In the United States, for example, in the same time frame that you're going to go from your 8 gigawatts to 100 gigawatts, the United States is trying to go from 100 gigawatts to 400 gigawatts of nuclear, right? So actually, both of our countries are looking at pretty aggressive goals in a relatively short period of time. Again, that's an opportunity why we're working together, because we're both going through a very significant build out. And I've traveled to countries around the world, and I'll tell you, this conversation about commercial nuclear, it feels like it's on everybody's mind. So as you look across Europe, as we've traveled to Africa, you can see work that's already happening in Canada. I mean, literally everywhere, people are looking. And why is that? It's the basic proposition that nuclear brings. It's highly reliable. It's clean. You get all of that energy in the core for years, depending on which make or model that you have. So you get energy security, you get climate security, you get highly reliable energy, and I would argue affordability. This is something that us working together is going to bring out the best of, because your supply chain and your workforce can really help bring the cost down on many of these makes and models. And the other thing that brings the cost down is we just start building and we get good at it. And that's why doing this together now makes sense, because we're both about to grow so significantly.
So data centers is a buzzword now as AI takes root, and there is always a debate on energy requirements of such establishments. So do you see standalone nuclear reactors powering these things so that they don't have to maybe resort on the grid, and the discussion on energy cost maybe kind of get reduced?
Yeah, so your question on data centers, first of all, they're very thirsty for power. So that's bottom line, right? So wherever that you're putting them, they're very, very hungry for a lot of power for their needs on the data centers. Your question is, we use the term behind the meter. Would you just have a dedicated fuel supply or a dedicated reactor, not feeding the grid, but just feeding the data center? I'm not going to say it's not going to happen, but I don't know that it'll end up being the preferred solution. And there's lots of reasons for that. But at the end of the day, these data centers really want high reliability. And so connecting to the grid gives you additional reliability. You already have a very reliable supply, but also you have that grid that's sort of constantly on. And with many of these systems, data centers is one example, if you lose the power to that, it creates issues that they have to do rework. They have to fix something because you lost that power supply. So they really don't want to lose the power supply.
Right.
And so there's other ways to do that. You can have other backup generators and that kind of thing. But I would say in general, I think that gives them, at least here in the United States, a bias for wanting to be connected to the grid. Everybody's going to have their own solutions though. So I'm not going to say nobody is going to go with a direct power solution. And, you know, obviously there's, you know, nuclear plants that offer that. There's going to be really remote locations, not necessarily for data centers, but could. And you might not really have a big established grid in some of these remote locations. Nuclear is perfectly, you know, suited for something like that, where you don't have that grid and you want that highly reliable power supply, and there you go. Whether you want a medium size or you want a small size, depends on what your needs are, but there's going to be a nuclear solution for you.
So we are seeing a kind of a second nuclear renaissance in the US. What actually was the reason for kind of a lull in nuclear sector in the US as well? Was it Fukushima or was it something
really
else?
It's just been a demand picture, right? If you look back over the last 30 plus years, the demand in the United States has been relatively flat. And so as a result of that really flat demand, you know, you really went with, well, what's the lowest price? Here in the United States, back in the roughly 2008 timeframe, fracking really became much more prevalent. It dropped the price of natural gas pretty significantly. And so it just made gas be like a preferential source and a selection to be made. And so I think, you know, you take a look at that, because back in that timeframe, we were also bringing some new options to the market for nuclear. And so when you say, well, Maria, what's different about now versus that 2008 timeframe? Well, okay, we could look at the price of natural gas now, which is a little bit higher, and has had more, you know, fluctuations to it. And you can also look at the fact that the demand is there. We just talked about AI. That's one of the reasons the demand is there. It's also there just from an advanced manufacturing and onshoring of more manufacturing here in the United States. The demand, as you look ahead, unprecedented demand for the need for electricity. Even as you go back 30 plus years, this is the most increase in demand growth that we've seen in the United States. And so that has a lot of interest on then what do I want to build? I want something reliable. In many cases, you want it clean. That's an attribute that's more important to folks now. You want it affordable, and you put all those things together, and that's why people are choosing nuclear.
So when do we see the first small modular reactors coming up in the US? And because in India we always tend to go in for proven technologies. So I mean, when do we see the first SMRs going online?
We have one under construction right now in Wyoming, Cameron, Wyoming. That is the TerraPower design. You have Kairos Power building down in Tennessee. Theirs. You have X Energy that's getting very close to a construction permit to begin their construction in Texas. You have the GE design under construction in Ontario and Canada. So I would say over the next few years, 3-4 years, you're going to have, some very well completed designs that you can have an option to look at. We've just completed 2 large reactors down in Georgia a few years ago. And so I think you're in a position right now where you have companies looking, again, across the board, large, medium, and small. You have several different types of microreactors that are making pretty significant progress. We've talked about some that are going to go critical by July 4th of this year. And so you really have progress on all fronts. But I would say as you get towards the end of this decade and into the beginning of the 30s, you're going to have completed designs that people are going to be able to, and it's the first one. So you're going to make improvements in schedule and in cost from whatever it is that's built. But I think it'll give people the first insight in terms of how much more, what else can I do to make it even more affordable and easier to build and to build it in less time.
Yeah. So the rules for the SHANTI Act are being drafted. Any top 3 agenda items that you would like to flag? Maybe that could actually be on the top of the mind of the US industry.
Again, I would just point to the fact that it's one thing to have, and I say this for the United States as well, it's one thing to say I'm doing this in legislation, and then there's the actual, okay, what am I actually going to get done? And so there's been great language in the SHANTI Act, but I think we need to look at the rules to make sure that everything has been addressed from a nuclear liability perspective, to make sure that the rules that have been established for commercial sector engagement are going to make sense, that are going to encourage that commercial sector engagement. And I think the only way to really sort of ensure that is ongoing dialogue between our Department of Energy and your Department of Energy. I think you call that the DEA.
Atomic Energy.
Yeah, Atomic Energy. And the same thing between our regulators. Our regulator is going through a lot of changes right now in terms of the rules that they use to regulate our industry. And I think that's a perfect opportunity for us to work together and share. These are some improvements that we've made in efficiency. This might be something that would be interesting to you. And so I think getting regulator to regulator conversation as well as our government to government, conversation is just key right now. It's key because your market is opening, and as I mentioned, the markets literally across the world are opening simultaneously. So there's just a huge surge of growth of sort of new things in nuclear, and now I think is an especially important time for us to work together.
Trust has been a key issue whenever it comes to India-US relations, and we have seen the trust actually go down over the past 1 year or so, particularly with the tariffs and the immigration issues. So how do you see these actually? I mean, will the nuclear sector be a bridge to bridge the trust, basically?
I think so. I think actually it's a perfect opportunity to build trust. Again, we both are bringing really established skill sets to this conversation. It's not one person has all the cards in the hand. It's together we have the best hand. And I think because of that, it creates an environment of building trust. And as I mentioned, I mean, India is very strong supply chain, very strong engineering talent, and nuclear awareness. You're not new to nuclear. You understand it and have worked very well with it in a very established sector. That to me just makes the perfect partner to go with the innovation that the U.S. And we've actually cultivated this innovation through our national labs over many, many years. And now that is being brought to the marketplace, also, engineering and workforce. And so it just feels like a perfect marriage. And I think because we're approaching that both with really strong skill sets, that's really what sets the backbone for building this trust.
Right.